Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well, and welcome to week 2 of college writing. I hope that your classes are going all right. I know, an hour ago, I was informed that all classes were going online for the next 2 weeks. So I won't see you in person for 2 weeks. Don't come to class. But as I tried to explain this last week, my class is designed so that everything is online except for the face-to-face discussion. And now, so everyone will do the online discussion instead of face-to-face, and we will be okay. So here's this week's lecture. Here's what's all in the video. There's a class business. There is talking about the part in our textbook that we read called Becoming a Detective, a little bit about shitty first drafts. We're going to talk about story elements and close writing. We're going to talk about the idea of show, don't tell. And then we're going to talk about mother tongue and literacy narrative. So lots to do. And again, I tend to go kind of fast because I'm worried that I'm boring you. But if I go too fast, you just contact me, you let me know, and I will happily fill in any gaps that we have. I built this PowerPoint before I found out about going online. So this is already obsolete. Basically, we're all online. Do everything online, including the online discussions for week 2 and week 3. Hopefully, I'll see you week 4. Fingers crossed. So, all writing is persuasive writing. We talked a little bit about that last week. We talked about it a little in class. All writing is persuasive writing. You are always, when you write, attempting to persuade someone of something. All right. Even if it's just you trying to persuade you to feel a certain way about your day, like you're writing in a diary, you write a to-do list, you're trying to persuade yourself to do the things on the to-do list. All writing is persuasive writing, which means there are 3 big things you always have to keep in mind when you're writing. And again, this harkens back to what we talked about last week. You need to know who you are trying to persuade. You need to know what you're trying to persuade them of, what you're trying to persuade them to believe, and know how to prove to that audience that you are correct. These are the 3 things that should always be focused in your mind when you are writing. Now, if we go back to last week, that means you need to think about your audience, and you need to think about rhetoric. And also, the second one, know what you want to persuade them to believe. That means that every time you sit down to write, you don't need to have a good idea of exactly what you believe as when you start writing. But you do need to have decided what you believe, what you want to say, by the time you revise it and turn it in. So writing is an excellent way of figuring out what you believe and what you want to say. But then it's incumbent upon you to go back and revise your paper so that you're starting from a point of, all right, here's what I want to say, and going from there. So, now, as I explained in class, I will often not refer back to the textbook a lot. Like many college classes, this class is designed so that I give you the textbook to learn some information here, and then I tell you a whole bunch of stuff I want you to know here, so that you're kind of merging them into the class. I am not always going to talk about what we talk about in the textbook. It is still very important that you read what is in the textbook, because my ideas and lectures are based on a belief that you have read and basically understood what's in the textbook. All right. Now, if you don't understand what's in the textbook, that's totally fine, as long as you are contacting me and telling me, Garcia, I don't know what the hell's going on, so that I can help you. All right. Now, but today I wanted to kind of start off by looking at what the textbook is talking about. And it talked about becoming a detective. And I think that's a really interesting metaphor for writing, especially academic writing. Right? When you start reading texts, right, and then you start writing texts, you are going to try and prove a proposition. You're going to prove your thesis. You're going to prove your purpose. All right? Which means that you have to think of your writing and your evidence as kind of little clues. All right? Here, here's what I believe, and then here is a piece of evidence, a clue that proves what I believe. Here's another piece of evidence. Here's another piece of evidence. If we're talking about like more fictional storytelling, like we're doing with the literacy narrative, your evidence is the details and the wording that you use to kind of express the emotions of the characters and what's going on. Right? So, when you are a detective, there are three big things you want to ask. The first one is always ask yourself what other explanations might plausibly account for the same pattern of detail. In other words, you are proving something. Are you proving something in the easiest way possible? Or is there a far more likely reason why your evidence happens than your answer? And you're just choosing to ignore it. Don't. If there is a better explanation for what is going on in your evidence, you need to use that even if it contradicts your thesis. Here's an example, right? This is a correlation graph that shows that there is over a 10-year period, there is a correlation between the letters in the winning word of a Scripps National Spelling Bee word and the number of people killed by venomous spiders. Right? So if you look, in 1999 they were the same. 10 letters, 10 people killed. 2000, it was just one off. All right? And then as you can see, these graphs are mathematically pretty darn close. Does that mean I can write a paper and use this as evidence? Can I say, look, I have mathematically proven that there is a connection between the number of letters in the winning word of the Scripps Spelling Bee word and the number of people killed by venomous spiders? No. Because it doesn't make logical sense. There's not a logical connection. There's a far more rational, reasonable explanation, and that is coincidence, dumb luck. So, when you're writing about your life, right, you want to describe it in such a way that it makes logical sense to people. And you want to have evidence and ideas in your academic papers that prove your idea, but prove it in the most efficient, easiest way possible. Number 2 for becoming a detective. All right. The range of associations for explaining a given detail or a given word must be governed by context. Right? Now, in English, sometimes we don't do this at all. But for most disciplines, when you use a word or you interpret a word, you have to interpret that word or interpret that detail in a way that is correct and meaningful for the context. Let me give you an example. All right. If I were to say the word adaptation, right, and the word adaptation exists in biology and in storytelling. An adaptation for storytelling is a story that came from another story first. Adaptation in biology is, physical and physiological changes that make a creature exist better in a given environment. If I'm writing a science paper, I can't, even though it is theoretically correct, I can't steal the definition of adaptation from literature and use it in a science paper because that context is all wrong. The context, if you're writing a science paper, you have to use the scientific definitions, the scientific words, the scientific meanings. If you're writing an English paper, you have to use the English words, the English definitions, the English meanings. All right? So what this means is that you cannot make a hypothesis or a theory or base a claim off of interpreting words or interpreting evidence that is outside the context of the discipline. Here's an example from XKCD. Right? Let's see. There's nothing in the rule book that says we can't kill and eat your dog. Right? This is obviously a dog show. The little dog with the number 9, he's got a little number on him so we know who he is. All right? It's obviously a dog show. So, you are absolutely probably this cartoon is 100% correct. There is nothing in the rules of a dog show that says you can't kill and eat the dog. But in the context of what a dog show is, that would never be something that we could logically do. Does that make sense? So in other words, everything that we do, our evidence, our words, our descriptions, have to be true for the context of what we're writing. Finally, now, this is a trickiest one. They're all tricky, I know. That's why I'm kind of going over it. But this one is important, but also you got to be really careful with it. It is great, in fact, wonderful, to use your personal reactions as a way to explore what a subject means. But your personal reactions are not evidence. You have to kind of remove your personal feelings from an equation, especially in an academic paper. So in other words, your personal feelings might tell you how you feel on a subject, let's say stem cell research. But you can't use your personal feelings as evidence in a paper on stem cell research. You have to go and you have to look at the real evidence, the real facts, the real data, and you have to make an argument based on that. In academia, we can't make an argument just with our feelings, just with our subjective ideas. We have to back them up with objective information, objective facts. So this is a rapper a couple of years ago. He says, the cities in the background are approximately 16 miles apart. Where's the curve? He's basically saying that this is flat Earth, that the Earth is flat, the Earth is not round, because you've got two cities 16 miles away, and in between them is flat. Now, yes, if you just look like out at the horizon, the world kind of looks flat, because our perceptions are not great enough to see the curve. Now, if we go high enough in the air, we can see the curve. In fact, I feel like I can kind of see a little bit of a curve here, just a tiny one. But so, I mean, that doesn't look like fully flat to me. But anyway, still, we can't let looking at something and having a gut reaction make us change our mind or use that gut reaction as evidence when there is good scientific evidence that better explains and backs up an idea. So, all right. That paper I had you read, Shitty First Drafts, I think it's a wonderful paper. I think it's wonderful to think and talk about how shitty first drafts work. That shitty first drafts exist. All of them are perfect because the only job of a shitty first draft is to exist. You have to do it before you can really revise a paper. So everyone has to write a shitty first draft. The professional writers are the ones that know that you're going to fix it later. People that think they're bad writers are people that just throw up on the page and they think that that's all writing is. So, but I wanted to point out another little paragraph in Shitty First Drafts. And this little paragraph is a great exercise, not just for writing, although it's specifically about writing. It's talking about how do you write when there's so much going on. And in this day and age, especially in the time of COVID, we all have tons of things pressing on our mind, worries, concerns, annoyances that get in the way of a clear head to write. And what I'm trying to say is you'll never have a clear head to write. Like, do not wait for you to feel like writing. It will never come. What you have to do is force yourself to write regardless of how you feel. And this little exercise is a great way to force yourself to write. It's also a great way to just kind of control your emotions. So it's a great kind of meditation exercise, even apart from writing. But here's what she says. I'm going to just read it out loud because I think it's wonderful. Close your eyes and get quiet for a moment until the chatter starts up. Then isolate one of the voices and imagine the person speaking as a mouse. Pick it up by the tail and drop it in a mason jar. Then isolate another voice, pick it up by the tail, drop it in the jar, and so on. Drop in any high-maintenance parental units. Drop in any contractors, lawyers, colleagues, children, anyone who's whining in your head. Then put the lid on. and watch all these mouse people clawing at the glass, jabbering away, trying to make you feel like shit because you won't do what they want, won't give them more money, won't be more successful, won't see them more often. Then, imagine there is a volume control button on the bottle. Turn it all the way up for a minute and listen to the stream of angry, neglected, guilt-mongering voices. Then, turn it all the way down. Watch the frantic mice lunge at the glass trying to get to you. Leave it down and get back to your shitty first draft. If you feel like you are anxious and worried and concerned about anything going on, take a breath, try this exercise, might do some good. Now, we take it to your, the rest of the paper kind of connects strongly with the literacy narrative. Your literacy narrative is a story, all right? And that means that your literacy narrative needs to contain all of the elements that a story contains. Now, a lot of this is going to be review from high school English, but I wanted to just bring it up real quick because it's super important that you remember the genre of a story. Remember we talked about the genre tells you the rules of what you're writing. The genres of stories are that they must have these 6 things. They have to have a plot. Your story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. All right? You have to say, this happened first, this happened second. If you remember, if you go back to, did I have it? I did not. If you go back to high school, you probably learned a little graph that was like a little line and a pyramid and a line with, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution or denouement. That is a plot, all right? You have to make sure that your story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that it goes in a logical order that the audience can understand. You have to have a setting. Your story has to have a when and it has to have a where. You have to have characters. Your story, now you are probably the main character of your story, and that's great. But you need to be sure that you are the main character. You could do it in like first person, we'll get to that in a second, where you're saying this is what happened to me, or you could write in third person and say, the little boy was angry, and you're talking about yourself. Doesn't matter. Both can work, but you do have to have characters in your story. Most importantly, a story has to have a conflict. Your literacy narrative has to have a conflict. Your literacy narrative has to have something that was hard to overcome, or that you didn't overcome, or that tried to stop you. There's got to be a conflict. And that conflict and dealing with that conflict has got to be the most important thing in your literacy narrative. Your literacy narrative needs to have mood. You need to have emotional content. If your character is angry, I need you to show me that the character is angry. If they're happy, show me they're happy. Give me the emotional mood. And finally, point of view, and that's first person, second person, third person. You need to decide how you're going to tell your story. If you're going to use I and make yourself a part of the story. If you're going to use he or she and make yourself a kind of character detached from the narrator. Either way works, but you have to decide. All right? So, in addition to story elements, and this is the most important part, this is where we get to close reading and close writing. All right? Now, you might have heard of close reading before. Close reading, where you read something a couple of times, each time you read it, you tear out more specific, important information on what's being shown to you and how it's being told to you. Well, close writing is the same thing in reverse. When you sit down to write, you need to think about every word that you're putting on the page, whether it's the word that you want or not. Now remember, we talked about this before. We ask, how does a story persuade? All right? A story can persuade, whether it's fiction or not, a story can persuade on numerous levels. These are just some of them, right? The audience is persuaded to pay attention. So you have to do something with your writing that persuades the reader not to just stop after the first paragraph. You have to get our attention. You have to grab us. You have to persuade us to keep reading. You have to persuade us that the events that you're telling us are logical. If it's a true story, that they happened. If it's a fictional story, that they could happen. Right? Even if it's like a sci-fi fantasy story, we have to be persuaded that the events happening are logical within the world that you made. So we have to be persuaded to believe what we're reading. We have to be persuaded to believe the overall purpose, the theme or moral that you're writing about. If you're writing about how, writing letters with your grandmother taught you how to be a good writer, then that's great. But we have to be persuaded that writing those letters actually helped make you a good writer. And in storytelling, you have to be persuaded to feel. And that's one of the most important things with a story and with writing. You have to persuade the reader to feel what you're feeling. If you want the reader to be angry at a moment, you have to persuade them to be angry. If you want them to be happy, persuade them to be happy. We do this with language. In fact, we persuade all of the ways we persuade, all right, in a story or in any kind of writing, are with the words we choose to say and the story that we choose to write. So, with close writing, there are 5 basic ways that we really control how to emotionally connect and persuade the reader. Figurative language. Figurative language is loosely defined as any time you describe one thing by comparing it to something else. Metaphor, simile, personification, all of these things are figurative language. We use these pieces of figurative language to give readers a more specific idea of what something is like. Sure, I could say something is hot, but if I say something is something burns like fire, I have a much clearer, more specific idea of how hot that thing is exactly. All right, or I could say face meltingly hot. And then we know it's even hotter than fire. It's like, ugh. So, figurative language, right, allows us to be really specific to persuade the reader on believing and understanding the descriptions and ideas that you're conveying. Imagery. Now, imagery is defined as using or evoking the audience's sensual perception. And when I say sensual, I mean the 5 senses. Touch, taste, smell, sight, sound. Imagery is kind of badly worded because we think image and that automatically we think of image, we think of sight, but it's any of them. If you ever, see a hamburger commercial and it makes your mouth water because you're really hungry, that is imagery because the commercial is persuading you to feel that hunger, right? We use imagery so that our audience can better understand, right, what's going on. If I say that, it was cold outside, that could mean a lot of different things. If I say it was so cold that I felt ice patches on my skin, that's a much narrower, specific idea. And people that have felt that kind of cold before know exactly what you're talking about. The next one is diction, right? And I've got examples of all these coming up. But the next one is diction. Diction is what in literature is basically word choice, all right? Why did the author choose this word? A great example is the word happy. Happy is a terrible word in writing. And the reason is that happy can mean so many different things. Happy could mean content. It could mean ecstatic. It could mean excited. It could be crazy. Happy can mean so many different things that authors often avoid it because you want to pick a word that is specific to how you want the audience to feel, as well as persuasive. So, happy could mean so much that I'm not persuaded of anything. Ecstatic, that persuades us to feel a very particular way. Details, right? Details is how we describe something in writing to make the audience feel about it. So let's say here is a super old flash drive, right? And I might say, this is the best flash drive in the world. It's 15 years old, but it still works. I can still read data off of it. This is a fabulous flash drive. So, the way I chose to describe this gave the audience a positive idea of the flash drive. Or I could say, this piece of junk has not worked once in 10 years. I don't know why it's on my desk. It's just stupid. Same thing, but described in a totally different way, forcing us to feel a totally different way about it. That's detail. And last, syntax. Grammar, spelling, punctuation, sentence construction. All of those things, all right, convey meaning. They don't just, they don't just define how a page should be written or how a sentence should be written or anything like that. They don't just follow rules of grammar. They actually change so that we feel a particular way or other about the writing. So I've got some examples for all of these. Figurative language. Again, this is all the stuff we learned in high school: metaphor, simile, personification, allusion, all of that stuff. Here's one of my favorite: personification from Antigone. The spear thirsted for blood. Right? Now, so in this personification, the spear is alive and is thirsty to drink blood. This personification compares a spear, as well as a person holding the spear, to a person that is dying of thirst. Right? So the spear doesn't just want to kill someone today. The spear has to kill someone today in order to survive. It is desperate to kill. It is longing to kill. Figurative language allows us to be really specific and emotionally evocative because we can compare one thing to something else that the reader really understands. Here's an example of imagery from Shakespeare. What soft, what light from yonder window breaks. Right? This is when Juliet emerges onto the balcony when Romeo is being a creep and kind of lurking after her. And he says, what light from yonder window breaks. He is comparing the beauty of Juliet emerging from her room to the beauty of sunrise. Now, none of us have met Juliet. We have no idea what she looks like. We don't know how beautiful that is. But most of us have seen an absolutely gloriously beautiful sunrise. So, by using imagery right here, he takes that mental image that we all have of a beautiful sunrise and says, take that beautiful image and apply it to Juliet. Boom. Now we know how beautiful she is. Diction. Diction can mean a couple of different things. Here's an example from Heart of Darkness. And farther down on the upper reaches, the place of the monstrous town was still marked ominously on the sky, a brooding gloom in sunshine, a lurid glare under the stars. Lots of great diction in that sentence, but I want to focus on monstrous. Right? Monstrous means what? Evil? Terrible? But it means something more specific than that. A monster is alive. A monster has cravings. A monster wants to kill. And so this town is not just evil. This town is living evil. This town wants to kill. It's not accidentally evil. It wants to be evil. And it's not accidentally gross. It wants to be gross. Right? The word monstrous gives us that powerful, feeling of being alive that most other words wouldn't. So by choosing that really specific word, the author conveys a very specific idea of what he's saying. Another way of using diction is with, breaking the rules. Zora Neale Hurston wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God. She was also a linguist, and she did a lot of work traveling around the Deep South, listening to African American dialects and recording them. She turned that listening to African American dialects into this phrasing for her novel. She says, sometimes God gets familiar with us woman folks too and talks his inside business. Now, grammatically, that is not theoretically correct, although it's also not grammatically incorrect. We'll get there later. But it's grammatically very distinct. And she gives us this grammatically distinct sentence because it's a way of saying who is speaking and where they're speaking. This is a dialect that is very specific to African Americans in the deep south of America. And so by speaking in this way, the audience knows, oh, okay, I know where they're supposed to be. Details. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but just she wears Adidas jogging shoes and a dove gray sweatsuit with canary yellow piping down the sleeves and legs. A little bit of imagery, which is a good reminder that all of these things bleed into each other. They're not just one or the other. Most good descriptions are combining most or all of these in some way, shape, or form. But why is it important that they're Adidas jogging shoes? Why is it important that there's a canary yellow piping? What does the word yellow convey? What about dove gray? Well, dove gray is pretty boring. It's pretty pointless. It's pretty nondescript. But a bright canary yellow piping says that, well, the person wearing it wants to be seen a little bit, wants to have a little fun. They don't want to be just drab. They want some color in their life. So we get a distinct idea of who this woman is just by this little description, right? And that's what descriptions do. Descriptions allow us to... So if you have a character that you want the audience to hate, you need to describe them with details that make us hate them. Syntax. My favorite example of syntax, the opening paragraph of Tale of Two Cities. I'll read it real quick. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity, it was the season of light, it was the season of darkness, it was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in the superlative degree of comparison only. Now, I know there's a lot going on, but what I want you to notice here is that's one sentence. And the reason that Charles Dickens, who knew everything there was to know about English grammar, the reason that he decided to write this long, detailed, full of opposites, all of these ideas and pack them into one sentence, is because the sentence is trying to say that the moment the story happens is both great and terrible. And so in order to fully show that this one single moment is both great and terrible, he writes a single sentence that combines the ideas of greatness and terribleness. That's some of the great stuff that syntax can do, right? It can make it... Now, looking at syntax can be really, really creative. Using syntax can be really, really creative. There are lots of grammar rules, absolutely. However, following the rules is sometimes important, but if breaking a rule creates the effect you want the reader to have, then I want you to break that rule. Because grammar and spelling and all of that exists not as a list of rules, but it only exists to let the audience better understand what we're talking about. If breaking a rule allows the audience to better understand what we're talking about, break it. All right. One final, I'm coming to the end. One final tip as you start to work on your literacy narrative. This is a good idea for all writing, but especially for storytelling. The idea of show, don't tell. All right. Force yourself to, instead of just telling the reader what something is or how something feels, show them what it feels like. Show them what it looks like. It makes for much more interesting reading. Here's an example. I felt sick. All right. Yes, I felt sick. I know exactly what is happening there. All right. But it's also kind of boring, kind of mundane. I felt my stomach churn. That's another... I mean, obviously the person's sick. Their stomach is churning. But we know how they're sick. We have felt our stomach churn before, so we know that kind of gross feeling. All right. We have, by changing sick to my stomach churn, we have connected the reader to this story. We have made the reader feel something. And when we make the reader feel something, they want to keep reading. So think about this idea of show, don't tell, and force yourself in the literacy narrative, especially, to any time you think you're just dropping in a simple description of what's going on, replace it. All right. Your first example of a literacy narrative, and I have several literacy examples for you to read. The first one is by Amy Tan. She wrote Joy Luck Club. It's a short story called Mother Tongue, and it's about her mom who spoke Chinese and then came to America and learned English, and her mom never quite learning perfect English or perfect kind of Americanized English. And Amy Tan discovered that with language, she does something called code switching. She doesn't say code switching in the story, but that's what she's talking about. A lot of you have experience, well, I'm going to say all of you have experience with code switching in some way, shape, or form. Some extreme, some minor. But code switching is when you alternate between two or more languages or varieties of language in conversation. You code switch based on your audience, right? So, when I speak to you, that's one code. When I speak to my wife, I switch it a little bit. It's a minor switch, but I don't talk to my wife like I talk to you exactly. It's a slightly different tone, all right? If you need someone to pick you up, if you text your friend, come pick me up, you're going to write something very different, probably, than if you texted your mom to come pick you up, right? My friends, I'd be like, hey, yo, come pick me up now. Hurry. My mom, I'd be like, hey, Mom, could you please come get me? I'm stuck over here. Can you come? It's the same thing, but because of my audience, I've changed how I'm speaking, and that's code switching. Code switching is most kind of vital to know about and understand when we're talking about issues of race and class, all right? America has a kind of unspoken rule that intelligent people speak with a particular kind of Western accent. I kind of use that type of speech most of the time. If I came into class talking like this, see, my brain might be the exact same, but you would have a very different impression of my intelligence based upon the accent that I'm using. And whether that accent is based on your region, whether it's based on your race, lots of races, I would say all minority races in America have distinct language styles, and people from that race have to have often an annoying time because the switch from one type of language to another is so extreme, right? So, learn about code switching. That's it for me. Here's what you need to do. Have a great week. I'll hopefully, fingers crossed, see you in 2 weeks. As always, please contact me if you need anything.